This student was intellectually beaten. Woke activists love keeping the spotlight on historical injustices, particularly slavery, using these discussions as a platform to argue for reparations. They argue that such measures are necessary to rectify historical wrongs and fix economic disparities faced by descendants of enslaved people. This is exactly what happened at Amherst University as a student tried to corner Dinesh D'Souza into admitting that systemic white privilege exists even to this day, but was having none of it and kept schooling the freshman, making him speechless in the process. Subscribe to the channel for more discussions like this. Let's jump into it.
After World War II, the white middle class soared to prosperity as a result of bills like the GI Bill. And African Americans who were coming home from war didn't get those benefits simply because they were African American. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs denied African Americans access to those benefits simply because of their race. I want to ask you, do you think any of that indignation, given certain circumstances, might actually be justified simply because there have been systematic blocks in people's way throughout American history, not ending with slavery, not ending with the Jim Crow laws?
So there are Americans whose present benefits are due to past advantage. By the way, this past advantage, which is often assumed to continue with the white man, actually goes all the way back to the beginning. The American Indians who were here first, right, had a huge advantage. We presume that they owned the whole country. Now, by the way, let's pause for a moment. How do you get to own a country? If you have Cain and Abel is a shepherd and Cain is a farmer, and Cain says, okay, I'm not going to put a fence around the whole world. I own it because I'm the only guy here. You're a shepherd. And my descendants will now inherit the earth, and anybody who shows up is a usurper. Rousseau says that the first guy who puts up a fence and claims he owns something is a con man. So the American Indians came. They happened to be first. They came in a bunch of tribes. The Navajos who got the land took it from the Hopi or the Pueblo. Their law of the jungle was conquest. That's how they got the land. There's a big fight about the Black Hills that I cover in the film. The Sioux who got the Black Hills took it from the Cheyenne. So when we say, oh, give us the land back, are you going to turn around and give it back to the Cheyenne? Oh, no. It's ours. Really? How come you own it forever now? So what I'm getting at here is history is very complicated.
I'll explain this further. It is crucial to acknowledge that the concept of privilege is not static but dynamic, changing across different times. Throughout history, various civilizations and groups have experienced periods of dominance and subjugation. For instance, in ancient times, empires like the Roman, Persian, and Egyptian, which were not white, as defined by modern Western contexts, wielded enormous power and influence, often at the expense of surrounding nations. Similarly, during different periods, nations such as China and the various empires of India were renowned for their advancements in cultural richness, which provided them with certain privileges over other regions. I also see no woke activists talking about the slavery Eastern European Christians faced. In North Africa, Robert Davis, who is a professor of history at The Ohio State University, found through his research that, quote, between 1 million and 1.25 million European Christians were gathered and forced to work in North Africa from the 16th to 18th century. Additionally interesting that all white people are privileged because of historical events ignores the immense diversity of experiences among white individuals. Many white populations have faced persecution and hardship. For example, Irish and Eastern European immigrants in the United States in the 19th and early 20th century faced significant discrimination and were not considered privileged. The dangers of generalizing an entire group's experience becomes evident when one looks at the socioeconomic disparities within racial groups, which can be huge.
Do you believe, if I can ask you a direct question, that you are the beneficiary of white privilege here at Amherst?
I
yes
do.
Or no?
Well, yeah, and
Pause.
Okay.
If you are, can I ask you a further question?
Okay, yeah, but I don't just say it in a I don't say it in a self-flagellating and self-aggrandizing way.
Hold on. Okay, go on.
You know what? I really try not to. I'm simply saying that because you asked me. Really, I view the recognition of one's privilege as an impetus to change things. So I don't just say I have white privilege. I try to help those who have not benefited from such privilege.
How? Hold on. Let's pursue this for a moment. You say, this is actually very important because there's a psychology here, right? One of the benefits of a good education of reading people like Nietzsche is you begin to understand how deep the human desire is for moral self-exculpation. Moral self-exculpation. Now, you say, and I didn't say this, you said this, I'm a beneficiary of illicit white privilege. Okay?
Illicit?
Well, isn't all white privilege illicit? Is it deserved?
Well, in this current system, there is legality.
Illicit means immoral.
Okay. Then
immoral white privilege. Yeah. Okay. So then if I were to say to you, there are surely many deserving minorities who would like to come to Amherst but have the inherited disadvantage of American history. Therefore, since you are an acknowledged beneficiary of illicit privilege, would you be willing to step aside voluntarily, putting your own moral mouth where your self-proclaimed virtue is, and give your seat, not my seat. I realize you may be super generous with other people's advantages and favor affirmative action, so other white kids who apply to Amherst are turned away to open spaces for minorities. But I'm not talking about you acting out your virtue on them. I'm talking about you acting out your virtue on you. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to give up your illicit seat that you don't deserve here at Amherst to make room for a disadvantaged minority? Yes or no?
The influence of the woke culture is spread through many aspects of our discourse, leading to a scenario where discussions about race become superficial and devoid of substantive action. These ideological fanatics prioritize appearances over action. For many of its adherents, it has become more important to be seen as holding the correct opinions about race rather than engaging in deeper, more impactful activities that affect real change. This virtue signaling involves individuals expressing opinions that make them appear good or morally virtuous to society, but without taking steps to address the issues at hand. It's a form of activism that is easily digestible and shareable on social media platforms, yet it lacks depth and fails to contribute to meaningful societal progress. This trend of shallow activism starkly contrasts with the deep and committed efforts seen in historical movements like those led by Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights era. King's activism was marked by profound engagements and strategic action that brought about legislative and societal change far beyond merely expressing the right opinions. His legacy was built on tangible action, which led to achievements born from thoughtful dialogue and courageous public stances, not from superficial declarations. I think our modern societies are faced with a challenge of moving beyond these superficial layers of discussion to engage in meaningful and actionable initiatives that address real inequalities. It requires a shift from performative activism to grounded, informative actions that tackle the root cause of racial disparities, such as educational gaps.
And so that's my response to you, but I would still like a response to my question regarding the inequity that I talked about with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. That is wealth that is passed down, and it's documentable wealth. The same way that the wealth created, or the wealth stolen as a product of slavery, was also documentable wealth. We have numbers that demonstrate precisely how much wealth was stolen, and that's money that in some way could be given back. Now, if
the core of the American system, this will actually answers your question directly, is that what do we do about the conquest ethic of the past? And here there are two options. There are two options. One option is we establish equal rights under the law. That was the solution of the civil rights movement, that we have had race-based discrimination, we've had racial hierarchy. Let's stop. Let's treat people according to the color of this, according to the content of their character. Equal rights under the law. Equal rights under the law. The other option, which you're defending, is you could essentially call it, let's correct for history. Let's correct for history. Let's try to find out who are the people in possession of stolen goods, and let's return it. Now, the first thing I'm trying to say is, this is a hugely controversial principle because it actually involves wrecking the freedom of a free society. You basically have to put it frankly, if we were to carry that out, go into people's homes and take their stuff. Take their furniture, take their cars. You don't seem to have even the guts to do that. You don't have the moral self-confidence to do it yourself. No, either you believe in it and you do it. Once you've done it, you might impress us. And then you might convince the rest of us that our wealth is also ill-gotten. But you can't do it. And I'm not trying to indict everybody of hypocrisy, only you. Because you're the one who said, I'm the beneficiary of illicit privilege. So you're a really good starting point, because I'm asking, if you're in possession of stolen goods, why aren't you willing to return them? So that's why fundamentally I see your charity. You know, during the Civil War, there was a guy who goes, I'm very happy to give, I've given 3 cousins to the war and I'm ready to sacrifice my wife's brother. That's basically your ethics. You're willing to have social justice if other people pay, but you're not willing to pay. So that's the problem. And that's the problem with the progressivism that marches behind social justice while protecting its own privileges.
There's no comeback from that. These woke activists always manage to turn the discussions about the history of slavery and racism into demands for reparations. And as D'Souza mentioned, the main idea behind it is to rectify past injustices through compensations, which are typically defined as financial payments. Now, there are multiple problems that arise from it, but the simplest one is who gets to define the value of slavery and thus translate it into financial terms to see how much these compensations should be. Another one is who is eligible to receive it and who pays for it. You see, the identification of recipients requires genealogical research that can be inconclusive, as many records are incomplete or have been lost over time. This makes it challenging to establish a direct connection between living individuals and their enslaved ancestors. Additionally, the question of who pays is equally contentious. Some argue that taxpayers, many of whom might neither have personal or ancestral links to the injustices being addressed, should not be financially held responsible for the actions of people who lived centuries ago. I think these people are doing their cause a disservice by constantly focusing on financial compensations because it simplifies the legacy of slavery and racism to a transactional resolution. It's about time we move past these victimization and excessive focus on the past and prioritize the future, because we have a lot of pressuring ideas that need to be dealt with. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think paying reparations will magically fix the racial relations? Let's get the conversation rolling in the comments down below.